Okay, this is our virus watercolor. We're gonna just try, this is a fun way to kind of get used to using watercolors. Um, I'm just using a regular piece of copy paper. If you have watercolor paper, it's always better to do it on watercolor paper, but I figured most people probably didn't have watercolor paper at this time, so we're gonna just show you how to do it with a regular piece of paper. And then I'm just using a very cheap set of watercolors. And the most important thing is usually the brush that comes with the watercolor is not a very good watercolor brush. You'll want one. This is just the brand that I picked up probably at Michael's or something like that. But what you're looking for is, you can see I've used it many times, so it's starting to fray a little bit. But as soon as you add water, that's what you want, is for the paintbrush to make a tip at the top, a point at the top, and not be fraying. So if you can do that with your brush, you know that you have a brush that will make it easier to paint. I know some of them come with kind of a square one and it's not very flexible. And then you'll just want some water and just a paper towel, because I usually, in fact, I'm gonna add this right here so you can see, I usually wet my brush and then dry it off just a little bit. So the first thing that with watercolors is that the paint will go where the water is. So if by chance you've wet your paper in a place that you didn't want the water to be in, or the color to be in, then you're gonna have to wait until it dries before, I don't want this to go through, so I'm gonna move this paper out of the way. You're gonna want it to dry completely, or you're gonna have a spot that is gonna be colored that you don't want. Okay, so first of all, I just wet my paper, and then I'm gonna take, and I'm just gonna start out with a light color, and I'm just gonna use yellow, and I'm just gonna go over where I made that wet spot. And you can see that as I'm making this, it goes on pretty light. And you always want to start a watercolor with the lightest colors first, and then add the darker colors. Okay, so there is one of our little viruses, and just gonna add another one. And they don't have to be perfect circles, because the real viruses aren't necessarily that perfect of a circle. They're kind of just blobs. So I'm gonna go through and add some more yellow here to this one. And this way, if you feel that your brush isn't wet enough, you can always add it, but you don't want to have too much water, because then you're going to be working, your picture's going to turn out like mud. Things are going to be blending too much. And sometimes your paper will rip if you have too much water. So you want to, especially if you're not working on watercolor paper. So here's the third one. I'm gonna do just a little smaller one. Now what you're gonna do is, I'm gonna go through with an orange. And because you can see it's still wet, you can take this orange, and I'm just gonna go around the edges. And you're gonna see that it will start blending together with the yellow. And that's the fun thing about watercolors, is how they kind of blend and spread into each other. So you don't need to add very much water to it, because the water is already on the paper, but you'll want to just add enough water to the orange to get it working so that it will stick to your brush. And you can see that it doesn't spread out anywhere that the water hasn't spread out. It will just stop. And again, we're going to be doing the same thing. The more water that you use, the lighter the color will be. So if you wanted a darker color, you don't want to use as much water. Okay. And you can see, now I just rinsed my brush and I've kind of dabbed off some water, and I'm just going to take it because I don't want a sharp edge. So I'm just going to come in and just kind of softly brush through that edge there so that it doesn't have a sharp edge, because I kind of want them all to blend. Now this one you can see that I used more water, and so it's not as defined, and this one didn't have as much water. So if you want, you can go in and start adding a little bit, and I wouldn't add any more water, I would just add some paint to that. And I kind of like how this is kind of fuzzy because it looks more like a virus. So I'm gonna take water, just plain water, to the outside of that one too, to kind of make it look a little more fuzzy. Okay, now we're gonna take some red and go on the outside of this circle that we've just made. And again, it's going to kind of just blend in. You'll know if your brush is too dry because it will start to split, and you don't want it to split. And then here again, here's kind of the red on top to kind of blend in. And then again, we'll add some more red to this one. All right. And you'll notice that if the red mixes, and then again, I'm going to go through just kind of this outline again and make it a little blurrier on the outside. If your red mixes with the yellow, it's going to turn in to orange. So you'll see a little bit more orange because of that. All right, now we're going to just take, I'm going to add some blue and make some of these coronas. So I'm just going to take the blue and make little lines coming out. Very easy, a line in a circle, a line and a dot. And you can make these how many you want, how far apart you want. And again, you're going to want to add some of these little dots in the middle. And do that for each one. Now this time I didn't add the water to this outside, but if you want them to kind of blend out, you can rinse your brush and then now add a little water to make it a little more flowy so it doesn't look so exact. All right, and the same with this one. When you're working with watercolors, if you want something to blend, you're gonna have to do it fast because it will dry fast and then it will become more permanent. And watercolors are a little less forgiving than most other art mediums. They can stain and you can't erase them. So you don't want things to dry if you don't like how it looks. Okay, gonna add a few more of these guys here on this one. Okay, and just add some of these in the middle. Okay, and what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go through and add a little bit of a purple to this blue. Just because it's fun to see how everything mixes. So I'm just gonna take some purple, and this time I'm just gonna kind of draw a line just through and just let that water blend it together. You don't want to blend it yourself, just kind of let it, the water just blend. Right, and then just add kind of a dot in the middle and let that blend. These, I think, turn out actually what I've seen the microscope pictures of the coronavirus actually look like, because they just kind of look like fuzzy little blobs. And then again, we're just going to add a little bit there. And this one, I'm just going to, some of these seemed like they were a little dry, so I'm just going to add a little bit of water to help let that spread out. And that's pretty much all that there is to this one until you've got to let it dry. Oh, and I'll show you, this is a good example. Do you see how I splattered a little bit right here? You can try to erase a spot you don't like, but it's really hard. You can take your brush really wet and then try to dab it off with a paper towel. When you have poor paper like this, it's not gonna come off very much. But while this is drying, I wanted to show you, I did bring a little sample of actual watercolor paper, and I wanted to show you kind of how it differs. And then you can decide, you know, if it's worth buying some watercolor paper. It's not too much money. It usually doesn't buckle. Oh, and I forgot on this one, after I did all this, on this original one, I wanted my yellows to be brighter. So I did come back through and just add some extra yellow on the top, which you can do as well. Just because I thought, oh, it needs a little bit brighter. But you don't have to do that if you don't want to. But okay, so I was going to show you on this one. Here's the yellow, and then we're gonna go orange around. And you can see how when we added the water to this paper, you can see the water that's soaked through that will disappear once it's dry, but the water is staying on the top, which is what helps it so that the colors stand out a little more and you can blend a little bit more. So if you like using watercolor, I would recommend that you get some watercolor paper. And then you see how this, and you can get it pretty cheap at like Michael's if you use a 40% off or whatever. But so you can see how there's a difference there between this and this, where the water doesn't seep through. like you have here. So we'll wait for this one to dry. And then if you want, after it's completely dry, and it will take a good half hour on this kind of paper. This paper, it will be dry in about 5 minutes, but this paper, you'll want it to be completely dry. And then I just took a Sharpie, a thinner Sharpie, and went and did the same kind of outline as we did on the monster virus, just to kind of define it if you like it that way. If you don't, you can leave it just like this. Hope you enjoy it.